Hello, everyone. My name is Virginia Prax, and I'm a member of the Compliance Records and Training Unit here at the Minnesota Department of Labor and Industry, or DLI. On behalf of John Brothen and the entire EDI team here at DLI, I'd like to welcome you to this presentation and discussion about EDI changes coming in February of 2023. Please note that your video and audio options are currently disabled to enhance our bandwidth during the presentation. But if you have any questions or comments, we ask that you utilize the chat feature. Please also be informed that today's session is being recorded and transcribed with our intent to publish on the DLI website. Since we are recording, we ask that you refrain from sharing any actual or live file data so that we are able to share it. And also note that today's presentation does include some coding examples from a test file that John will be sharing in some of the notes of his presentation to help explain some of the coding changes again. And as always, if you have any issues or questions on a specific filing, please reach out to our EDI team at any time at dli.edi@state.mn.us, and certainly I'll post that email in our chat, and then it'll also be shown on the last slide of the presentation. And at this time, I'd like to introduce John Brothen. John's our EDI Coordination Supervisor within DLI's newly formed Business Technology Office, or BTO. I'll go ahead and turn it over to John and let him share a little bit more about this new unit as well as the changes happening in EDI.
Yeah, thank you, Virginia. It's a wonderful introduction, and thanks to the EDI team for helping us put all these things together. And thank you to all of our attendees today who are here to learn more about what the Minnesota Department of Labor and Industry and the campus system is doing as far as our EDI XML upgrade. So yes, there have been some changes at the department. We still have a EDI team. It's substantial cross-unit EDI functional team, but we do have some new units in our division that are helping to facilitate our campus application and upgrades to our campus system. And that's called the Business Technology Office. So we're here today to talk about what's coming in the future for Minnesota and our EDI XML program. Today actually is, or this evening, I should say, our campus system will be putting out a new technology release, which we periodically do, where certain functionality in the campus system will be updated, and information about those updates will be shared tomorrow and through next week about what those system upgrades are. But then after tonight, the next major technology release or update to the campus system will be in February of next year. And we're slating that for February 9th of 2023. And the major component of that new technology release or update will be campus's adoption of the Release 3.1 XML format through the IIBC's XML format for claims reporting. Minnesota, we're going to be sunsetting the Accord version of the XML format, which means we'll be upgrading to the latest and greatest and easiest to use from our perspective XML format for claims reporting EDI transactions in Minnesota. So with that, let's get into some of the things that will be changing and other things that won't be changing as we look toward February of next year and the new release format. So on slide 2, I'm showing, this is our DLI webpage where you can find at our website the documentation that per the Release 3.1 standard, Minnesota publishes. Some of these are still, they're labeled as drafts for legal purposes, but they're essentially the final versions of our documentation, our guide and tables. And some have been updated and some have not. And even those that have been updated, it's fairly minor, and we'll get into discussion a little bit about that and what those updates are. But if anyone is still in need of finding those, the website is there and the documentation is listed. So
John, this is Virginia. Can I just ask, is everyone seeing slide number 2, or are we still seeing the kind of the opening slide number 1?
Still seeing the opening slide number 1, Virginia. I
Okay,
had to click on the bottom and it clicks over to page 2. It
okay,
says 2 of 12. If you click over, it clicks to 2. You have
It,
to do it manually.
it's
sounds good.
on page it's on page 2 now, Virginia.
Great. So, John, if you just tell me when you'd like me to advance slides, I can take that
Certainly.
part over.
Well, with that, let's look at slide 3 then. So what are we going to talk about or learn today? The first is how Minnesota is adopting the new IIBC great new system for XML reporting this next February. And then the two main changes, the things that are really different from what was happening with our reporting previously to this adoption. The update of two new DNs that are pretty Minnesota specific, the collective bargaining agreement code, and even more critically, the withheld attorney's fees current DN. And then we'll also just talk a little bit about testing that's going to be coming up for some of the entities like trading partners and EDI vendors who will be testing with Minnesota, and then also a little brief blurb about getting in those tricky Froy and Shroy update reports so that for those old claims that are qualify for reimbursement can be up to date. So let's look at slide 4. So what is this new format? So Minnesota is currently using the Accord XML format, and for anyone who's familiar with that, it's a form of extensible markup language reporting that was developed for the IIBC by the Accord organization, and it is a useful tool in using claims reporting. But that relationship did end, and the IIBC went out and actually developed its own format for XML reporting. And it's really a fantastic new way of reporting EDI claims information within the Release 3.1 standard. It's better layout, includes the correct tag names, DN numbers. It's really fantastic. So anyone who has to actually look at XML files will greatly appreciate the update from the Accord to the IABC XML format. And so we'll all be seeing that happen February 9th. Now, for most people, there really won't be much of any change at all. You won't notice a change. If you're just a person working for a trading partner or a claims administrator, the change in formats, you may never see an actual XML file. So that's really not a big deal. However, there will be two new DNs, two new data elements that are traded with Minnesota that will come into play that will pretty much everyone will have some impact on their claims reporting. That's, of course, the collective bargaining agreement code, as we can see here, and the withheld attorney's fees current DN, as well as its associated benefit adjustment code, which is 4 for Chico's withheld attorney's fees. So let's look at slide 5. So first, the collective bargaining agreement code. Now this is a code that was pretty much developed for usage for Minnesota, but it does kind of have a generic flavor to it. If you just looked at the DN, you might think, wow, this just means any employee who happens to be in a union, I should send this code. That's not the case for Minnesota. Collective bargaining agreement code is specifically used for a very unique program called the Union Construction Workers Compensation Program, or what we always like to call the UCWCP for an acronym. As we know in work comp, we all love acronyms. So what that does is it's replacing a workaround that never really worked prior to this, where we were going to try and leverage the organizational or the managed care codes. And so instead, it'll just be a very clean, simple process where the claims administrator, trading party, you can send DN 438, mark it yes if the claim happens to be a UCWCP claim. And then in our system, we'll be able to flag it appropriately that that's a UCWCP claim. There's also values of no or unknown, which are also valid. Um, I think the one thing to note for claims administrators or anyone programming claims administrator systems is to try and be as aware as possible whether or not you have UCWCP claims or not. And in conjunction with our release, we're also working with the UCWCP so that they will be sending as much information as possible directly to the carriers who maybe have covered employers who are part of this program, so that from both from our direction and from their direction, we'll try and keep everyone as apprised as much as possible so that they can accurately report which claims actually do fall into that program. So a simple code with maybe a little bit of homework to be done. but we think that's going to be a great upgrade over what we had previously. So let's look at slide 6. Okay, so withheld attorney's fees current. Now this is a more complicated new DN that we will be adopting. It was a brilliant concept or idea. If those of you who are aware of the overpayment amount current, this is kind of working in a similar fashion, but basically in the reverse. So this new DN, for anyone who knows claims in Minnesota, is used to report the potential contingent of attorney's fees being withheld from the employee's weekly benefits. Now, previously we had a sort of phantom adjustment thing going on, but now we'll be able to report very clearly what's happening when an employee's benefits are being withheld for the potential to pay out attorney's fees. Between the adjustment code and the withheld attorney's fees current, it should be able to be very clear as to what happens when withheld attorney's fees come into play. And one thing to note or to remember, and this is per the standard, is anytime withheld attorney's fees current is reported, then it eventually returns back, that DN eventually returns back to $0. It'll stay at $0 for the remainder of that claim unless it actually comes into play again and withheld attorney's fees are taken again. So it would never actually return to null. So we can always identify that fees have been taken. Okay, so let's look at slide 7. So now we're getting into the beloved scenarios that I think are most helpful when trying to describe a more complicated situation or a scenario like withheld attorney's fees. I have to give thanks to the IABC who does this sort of standard version of scenario creation so that we can see kind of how this lays out. Anyone who's familiar with some of the IABC committees may be quite familiar with how this looks. But what I'm trying to show here is the essential data elements that would be needed to understand how to report withheld attorney's fees and how they impact a claim on the benefits reporting side. So in the box that we see on the left, I'm trying to show an MTCCA or change in amount transaction where the claims administrator has decided, okay, I need to start taking withheld attorney's fees because I think there may have to be fees paid to an attorney somewhere, at some point down the road in this claim. So the CA transaction is sent, and at the time of the CA transaction, withheld attorney's fees have actually been ongoing for 2 weeks. So therefore, you can see the difference between the gross and the net weekly amount reported in the benefit section is $500 to $100 or $500 to $400. The $100 difference is reflected below in the adjustment, what's referred to as the ACR section, where the $100 is present. So this is trying to give you the example of how the math essentially works, or the accounting works on between the benefits segment, the adjustment segment, and the withheld attorney's fees current. So you can see as the adjustment's taken, the withheld attorney's fees current grows. So if we shift to the box on the right, then what I'm showing is what happens then if that matures a little bit throughout the claim. I kept the math as simple as we could be here, and we only extend to a SX or full suspension transaction 1 week. So we see the withheld attorney's fees current has grown another $300. Gross weekly amount and the net weekly amount remain the same because the adjustment was taken. But then down below in the adjustment code, we actually see that the adjustment has an end date, although the $100 is still the same. So with that, let's flip to slide 8. Here I'm showing on the left, just replicating the SX box that we had on the previous slide for reference. But then on the right is the more important box that shows what happens when the withheld attorney's fees are finally paid out. So here I'm showing one of 3 examples, and we'll get into those examples a little more on, I believe, the next slide. But here's what I think might be the most common way to report this, although it's going to be up to claim administrators to do this specifically. But as you remember on the SX, we saw that there was $300 ultimately withheld from the employee's benefits over the life of this claim. And now they need to go somewhere. They need to get paid back, whether it's to the employer or to the employee's attorney. And in the payment report or MTCPY transaction in the box on the right, we can see that $300 are being paid and they're actually being paid back to the employee. Now in this version of the scenario, I'm showing the benefit type code is a temporary total lump sum payment. So this would be if anyone knows specifically, it's the 550 code to report that, to report that benefit. And that's why the new benefit appears there in the amount of $300. We also have the payment segment, which matches it, the 550 TTD lump sum payment of $300, and we can see the employee is the one who's being paid that amount. The all important thing too is that the withheld attorney's fees current, now that it's been paid out, it returns to $0 because we now know that it's been put back, basically paid back to the employee. So that I think is the most common scenario or option that will happen, but we also have others that we need to explore. And so with that, let's look at slide number 9. So payment scenarios for withheld attorney's fees current. This gets a little bit complicated because when paying back withheld attorney's fees to the employee and or the employee's attorney, really, campus will accept different benefit type codes. So like basically we could always accept a 500 or an unspecified lump sum payment code, but we could also accept what's referred to as the 5XX benefit type code or the 0XX benefit type code, depending upon ensuring that it at least matches what type of benefit it was originally taken from. That's really our only caveat that we have here. And so to try and explain that a little more, I have 3 examples. So like in example 1, let's say that withheld attorney's fees were taken in a complicated manner between both weekly temp total and weekly temp partial benefits. Let's say they went back and forth and in and out and all those kinds of things. And so the amount is a little bit harder to track. In that instance, that might be the best scenario to report the benefit type code 500, an unspecified lump sum amount, because while we know what the ultimate total of the withheld attorney's fees is, it's kind of hard to break them apart. So it's totally okay to send that as the unspecified lump sum payment code. Now in example 2, we have similar scenario, but we know that it's just been withheld from the employee's temp total benefits, and that's it. In that scenario, that's kind of matches what I had shown in our boxes above, where it could be paid back as a temporary total lump sum payment of 550 code, and that lines up really nicely and it makes a lot of sense. But in fact, we also allow in example 3, this may be less common, but if people want to do it, we certainly accept it, where again, the employee's benefits are being withheld out of their weekly temp total benefits. And then the claims administrator just wants to pay it right back and top off that TTD. They can do that as well and pay it right back into the BTC 050 that it came from. So those are all options. The only thing that I'm not showing here is an option that wouldn't be acceptable, where like let's say the fees were all withheld from temp total, but you paid it back to temp partial, and we don't want to see that. That wouldn't make sense, and we'd wonder what's going on. So that's the only caveat there to looking at these withheld attorney's fees scenarios. So with that, let's look at slide number 10. Okay, so testing. This may not affect many people, only a select few, but it's good to know from everyone from a perspective who's with claim administrators that both our few direct connects and as well as our EDI vendors are going to be testing this new XML format with Minnesota this November and in December. And what that is it's a way for us all to prepare together to make sure that the new XML format is in sync between us and campus and all the claims administrators. And that we'll all be on the same page and ready for that big February 9 changeover and move together. So that, let's look at slide 11. Now, as a side note, with our release on February 9, Minnesota is going to be looking to make something a little more streamlined, and that's anyone who files annual claims for reimbursement. These are for the old claims, the SB claims they date back to the decades ago in the past. Minnesota is now going to be looking to require Froy and Troy update reports, or URs, that bring our legacy claims up to date in campus. What we found is that when those URs that are up to date and the claims look ready to go, we can actually process the claim payments much faster and everything works better in campus. So that will be essentially a requirement as we get to February 9. Right now, we're working with as many people as we can to try and make sure their claims are up to date. But if anyone who's listening, if you know that you have annual claim for reimbursement claims, and you may want to check to see and make sure that you've done those UR filings on those claims if you're going to do another annual claim for reimbursement, just to make sure that you're ready to go and that everything's up to date. So with that, let's look at slide 12. Thank you, everyone. I know that was a kind of a quick training. It wasn't a lot to go through, and we don't have a ton of updates. but I think it's important that the department, we really like to try and give what outreach we can and keep everyone up to date with the big happenings that are happening here at DLI. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to send them through the chat. Virginia, have we seen any questions happen yet?
I'm not seeing anything at this point. If I did it correctly, hopefully I've unmuted everyone's mics, or you should be able to unmute yourself now if you'd like to ask a direct question, or certainly we'll watch the chat here for another minute or two to see if anything comes in that way. We're also showing that email box to get a hold of the EDI team for any either questions on this presentation, certainly, or any EDI issues, concerns, questions. Yeah, so no other questions, John, in the chat. Just certainly a thank you to you for your time, and the whole EDI team for all the work you guys do and the prep and the testing I know that's going to be going on here over the next couple months, with those partners. Well, great. I think we'll go ahead and end the call then. Not seeing anything in the chat or nobody else coming in with any other questions. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yep. Bye.